Hi everybody, welcome back to HighByte. I'm Tom, this is Zero to Pipeline, and today we are going to talk about models and instances. And now up to now we've created some data in some pipelines and we've messed around with them a little bit, but when we made that data, we did it in a slightly bad way. Not everything was in the right format, not everything was named the same. Much like if you can imagine you've got a lot of people in an organization all recording data on your pumps and maybe they're not all naming them exactly correctly. So we want to add a layer to our pipeline. We want to add a model that is going to define how our pumps should present data. Let's get into it.
All right, let's hop into this. So I'm going to go ahead and log in. I'm here in Intelligence Hub. There we go. And the first thing I want to go do is just check out my pipeline that, we've got running here. So we have 3 pumps creating data, and for review, remember that each one of them is a little bit different. They're not quite named the same. They don't quite have the same format. And that, is probably reminiscent of some way that things are configured interface or enterprise-wide. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure that these pumps all follow a consistent model and have a consistent footprint. And the way that we're going to do that is we're actually going to define a model pump. So I'm going to go up here to our models module, and I'm going to create a new model. I'm going to call it pump, and I'm going to define what the ideal pump looks like. And say next. Now, our ideal pump should probably look kind of close to our current pumps. I'm going to go ahead into my UNS client here. There we go. And we're just going to use one of these pumps as an example, but it's going to have a name, a flow rate, a flow unit, power draw, power unit. But I'm going to make sure that I actually name all of these guys correctly, right? So our ideal pump should probably have a name, right? And then it should have a flow rate. Let's keep it easy for ourselves and call it flow. Oof, he said easy. Oop, all right, I pressed create too early. That's all right, I'm still gonna edit it here. I can do flow unit, power unit. Great, and we'll say that's pretty good. So we know what we have. We want to name, and then we can define each of our attributes of whether they're required. Now, our pump has to have a name. We'll say that the pump's got to have a name, right? And what kind of data is it? Is it a simple attribute? In our case, it's just going to be a string. It's going to be like a name, so that's fine. We'll keep it as simple. In fact, all of ours are going to be simple, but what is an object? This could be, there's a nice little icon for an object. This could be if we had a whole JavaScript or JSON object that we wanted to use as a parameter here, that this model would hold an entire object. You could set it to be an object. Modeled lets us choose another model. So this is similar to an object, but it's just another model that we define in the models. You might want to do something like this if you had, if you're making a chocolate bar, right? And if you were using your models to keep your recipes or to format your recipes. So your chocolate bar maybe contains chocolate, peanuts, and caramel. Okay, chocolate and caramel themselves each probably have their own recipe. So you would have another recipe that is each one of those components themselves would be another model, which is another recipe, right? So that's how you can sort of build this hierarchical structure using either the model or the object attribute type. But for our case, we're going to keep it pretty simple. We're just using names, numbers, strings and numbers. So we'll go ahead and say that our name is going to be simple. And it's going to be, I could leave it as any if I'm okay with it being flexible. If I want to be strict, I can fill out exactly what it's going to be. In our case, it's going to be a string. Our flow is going to be a number. Now, we probably have a flow rate, but maybe we don't. So I'll leave it unrequired. But we'll say that's also a simple type. Also simple. And this one is going to be a real number. Real 32, we'll call it. Flow unit. That guy is going to be a simple string. And then here I can give it a description or a default value. I could do this with all of them. Flow unit. We're going to make sure that this is properly JavaScript, so I'm going to put it in quotes to say this is a string. Gallons per minute. That's going to be our default value. If we overwrite that, fine. If we don't, it's going to be gallons per minute. Power. Simple. Real number. And then power unit. Simple. String. And we'll call that one default there. I said watts, I'm pretty sure. Let's go check. Watts. Sure. Uppercase, uppercase, lowercase. Irritating. So that's one of the reasons we might want to use a model. There we go. All right. So let's say save there, and we've created our pump model. Now, we didn't actually connect any of these to pump data, right? So this is just our model. And this is like our blueprint, our class structure. Once we want to start making instances of this model, once we want to make pumps from our pump blueprint, we're going to go here to the instances module. I'll select that. I'll hit a new instance. And I'm going to call this one pump1. Great. So here I'm going to go ahead down. I'm not going to make a description, group, or tag. These are sort of organizational things. But I do need to select a model. What model is this using? It's using the pump model. Perfect. Next. And now I can start filling out, I'm going to show these in just a second, these different attributes for pump1. The easiest way to do this is to use an expression type reference. And I can just drop my reference right here. There's also an expression type expression where I can write JavaScript code. So I can be very flexible here. This lets me do like multi-line let my var equal 14, right? And then I can return my var. I can do multi-line evaluations here and they all get processed. So this is very flexible and very powerful, but if I'm just returning pieces of an object, I probably don't need to do this. So for this case, let's just go ahead and do pump1. And one of the things you'll note here is in my references pane, in some of these modules, I can like break out my references pane. You can see we had a little loading button there, and it did an MQTT query on that input, and it found, oh, these are all the attributes of your object. Neat. I can connect those guys up. So let's go ahead and name, let's get a reference there, and whoops, excuse me, and let's drop this name reference. Perfect. We're connected. There's my path. This is saying like where in this object, in this object I'm going to be looking for it, dot name, great. Flow, bonk, flow unit. I'm actually going to leave that blank, and I'll show you why in just a second. Power, bonk, and there we go. Create, pump1. Now I'm going to do a test instance, which is going to be like test reading this instance. There we go. And you can see my flow unit and my power unit, even though oh gosh, that's going to kill it. Hold on a second. We're doing this, we're modeling it, we're going to do it right, we're going to make sure it's uniform. Perfect. Fixed there. Instances, pump1. Test instance. All right. Much less terrible. All right. These are the default values that I configured in my model. When I didn't provide values for them in my instances, I got the default value back, right? Otherwise, this is a properly formatted pump. That's great. And I just made the connections from my input, from pump1. Okay. One down. Let's do another one. Let's go back to instances. Let's make a new instance. Let's call it pump2. Pump2. Good. Model, pump, next. All right. Input. Internal MQTT. I did not make a pump2 input. Ooh, and if I do my little, oh, actually that did work. Huh. I wasn't really expecting that to happen. I think this is because the last thing that I queried through this had these values, but let's pretend that's not there for a minute. Let me go ahead and say, let me make this for pump2, and I'm going to create that. If I go into name, I can grab, without breaking this down, I could also grab my arbitrary topic here as a reference. And you'll see I can make my edits here now, where I can say, this is the topic that I want to, oh, that's why it broke down, because I gave it a default value. It was able to query pump1. It found these values, which means it might not work because remember, we named some of these differently in the other pumps, and we're looking at doing pump2 now. Okay. So there's a couple ways I could do this. I could go ahead and set up this arbitrary topic. For path, I can say, all right, which of these do I want to use? We know .name is going to work for us because we named that consistently at pump2, right? .name. And I can edit this and say pump2. Great. For flow, can make this connection say, what was the flow connection? Well, we know it's going to have to be pump 2. And path is going to be, it's going to be flow rate, no W, capital. Right? So you can see this is how I would be able to, let me just save and test that instance there. Ooh, does this work? Yeah, there we go. It did work. And you see I didn't connect the power, and so I didn't get a power here. But that's OK. It wasn't required. It didn't give me an error. This is one way you could configure parameterized inputs in an instance. Let me show you another way, because I think it's kind of neat. I'm going to switch this to expression. And in fact, it's gone ahead and written this out for me. Where we're going to get the return, if I drag one of these connections in, right, I can actually still do this. It's going to give me this connection syntax, this connection reference syntax in a handlebar notation, right? If I drag one of these guys in, it's going to give me that plus the path, the extension for the attribute. So what's going on up here? OK, so this here is how we're going to pass parameters into that we've set up as parameters for our connection, right? So where we said topic is pump/pump2, here we're going to put at the end of this connection in the handlebars, we're going to put parentheses. And we're going to pass in an object. So an object is in curly braces. And we're going to pass in the parameters for those for that connection with a key value pair. So ours was topic. And then the value for that pair was going to be pumps/pump2. Right? And that's exactly what we've got going on up here. And then we did, from there, we had flow rate. So if you're writing an expression, you could grab these things if it's going to work for you. If stuff is different enough, or you have, if you're templating with an arbitrary input from stuff with different shapes and you have to know how to find these pieces, this is where you're going to write your object that has your parameter name and value. And this is where you're going to drill down into the path. This used to be a little different. And I'm going to show you this not because it's still relevant, but because you might see it on older versions of Intelligence Hub from 4.1 or earlier. Rather than having this topic pumps or pump/pump2, we used to have a parameterization system that looked like this. You would have topic is equal to pumps/pump2. Right? This is not still going to work. So if I run this, we're just going to break. But be aware that other times offhand in this tutorial series, you might see some formatting that looks like this. Or in older versions of Intelligence Hub, you might see formatting that looks like this, somewhere on user guide, in the knowledge base. This is just old formatting for this new version. Now, these stringified connections where we did handlebars and we made these like longer text references used to be more common too. And so this used to happen a lot more. We didn't always have this sort of nice layout to set in the pieces that we were interested in here. So you're going to see this a lot more, and I really encourage you to use it. But occasionally you might come into a case where you want to write out your connection, and this is how you're going to pass parameters into it. All right, all that aside, let's go ahead and finish out what we're doing here. Let's do flow unit. I'll do it just for the sake of it. You know what? Why not? What do we call this? Arbitrary topic. You can also imagine this is much easier to typo. Flow rate, is that what I wanted? Flow rate, there's no W. Great. Save, and then, oh, that's for unit. Nuts. Okay, we'll just get rid of this. Get out of here. Power. Here, I'll do it. I'll do it this time. I'm sort of drawn to this mechanism for no particularly good reason, just that I think it's cool. And what was my power draw? That might not be different. just for the sake of it. It's not. Pump/pump2. All right, let's go ahead and save this. Let's test that instance. Great, we got 3 values. Pump2, done. Pump3. I'm actually going to do pump3 different again because I want to show you another way that we can make instances. I'm going to go ahead to pipelines. I'm going to make a new pipeline. I'm going to call it pump3 instance. And I'm not going to do any organization stuff here. I'm going to build the empty pipeline finish. OK. Let's go ahead and read. Just do this basic read stage. Input for arbitrary topic. And I want pump3. There we go. So if I do a test read now, or in the debug, or a test run in the debug, I should get, there we go, data for pump3. Cool. And we have another stage here. We have a model stage. Now you could call this a model stage. It is called a model stage. I also like to think of this as an instance stage, because really what we're doing here is taking the model pump and we're making an instance of it, but on the fly in a pipeline. And I can configure those bits going here into the configure attributes. And based on the message that let me close this, based on the message that I'm sending in, I can start to populate these fields. So what we're going to do here is a return, and then event.value. Notice I'm not using handlebars this time. I'm not using this. I'm using event.value and name. There you go. Let's just run that and show that we're getting something, right? So we got a name coming through now. And oh, there's our default values for the units. And that was pretty simple. So let's do the other ones too. Flow, I've already forgotten. We're on pump3 now. Flow is in flow rate t because we goofed that. Return event.value.flow rate t. Great, except, oh, whoops, too quick. And power will be, I'll save myself a little bit of trouble here. Flow rate t, but not that. I want power draw. Accept. All right, save, run. There you go. And you can see now the output of this model stage is a lovely modeled pump. We have another couple of stages here you can use, or another stage that you might find interesting, the model validation. If I take this guy and I drop it in here, this is to say that like this model must meet this model. And if it does, I get a pass. I have an event propagate up the success chain. If it doesn't, oh, actually this might pass. Hold on, I might have to. Yeah, failed to validate, because if it's got additional properties, we fail. This isn't actually that these are named wrong. It's that I do have one that is named correctly, and then I have a bunch that were not required, and they're not, but I have this set to fail if present. If I change this to allow, and I run this, I think this is actually going to, yeah, that is going to be good, because basically I've said only one of these is required, and that's name, and they just happen to have name be correct. And anything else is great, but, you know, anything else is permitted, but nothing that was required wasn't here. Right, so you can use this model validation stage to also just see if your objects match what you want them to match. All right, I want to show you another thing. Let's make a new pipeline again. New pipeline. Let's look at read instance. All right, I'm going to go ahead and say I want an IO, I want to read, and what do I want to read? I have options. We've been reading a lot of inputs for the most part, right? Specifically MQTT. I can do that. Or I actually want to read, you can see conditions, system variables. I can read instances, right? So I can drop this in here, pump1, save, bonk, run. And you can see now I'm reading instance from pump1 as if it were an input. So this makes it really convenient for me to access that data that I configured in that instance. I can do the same with instance pump 2. I can do I can't do the same with pump 3. Why is that? Well, because I built my instance for pump 3 in this pipeline, this is not going to be reusable. It's not going to be callable up with a connection, with like an input-like connection in all other places, right? So here, I'm a little stuck. This is really helpful if I have a complicated situation that I need to model, because I'm sort of like going through and sourcing data from a bunch of different places, and it's easier for me to conceptualize in a pipeline, and maybe that gives me a lot of flexibility, but it means this isn't going to be reusable. So you kind of have to do a little bit of weighing where you're going to build your instances. Am I going to build my instances in the instance menu, where they're going to be reusable, but maybe a little stricter or harder to navigate using, these expression type builds? Maybe if I have some things that are dependent on the other, I can use the initialization. I'm not going to go over this, but this is where you can do like some pre-code, because all these attributes are going to be calculated individually. The initialization block lets you do some precursor algorithm that will let you like set up data that will be used later on in all of these. So if you need one to sort of affect the other, that's how you can get around it. Check it out in the user guide. But do I want to go through the overhead of building these instances in the instances module for them to be reusable and easily callable? Or do I want to, if I'm only using it once, or it's a particularly complicated thing and I'm not using it frequently enough, do I want to go ahead and just build it in my pipeline? That's going to be for you to evaluate as you're doing your pipeline and sort of as you're going through that space. All right, let's see. I had one more thing that I wanted to start talking about just to set the stage for the next video, because you're probably looking at this and be like, cool, we've got now all of these pumps are reliably the same shape, which means I could really easily call them up. But boy howdy, we did a lot of clicking again. We made one instance for each of these pumps, and we clicked a bunch of things each time. And if I've got 3,000 pumps, I'm not going to click that button, 27,000 times. And you're right. So what we've got coming up, I'm going to tease this just a little bit, is templating. So if I go here to template type, I can do static, I can do dynamic. And this is going to let us set the patterns for a lot of really helpful stuff. You're going to see, we're going to be able to say, all right, this is kind of what your template's going to look like. This is how you're going to source all your data. Now go do it with this slight change 300 times. We're going to do it 3 times, but you'll see how it could cascade out. If you can find that pattern and do some engineering, you're going to save a lot of times by using either a static template where you give it all the values with a nice range, zero from 1 to 3. Well, 1 to 3. Pumps 1 to 3, or with a dynamic template where you can read those in from a file. So I'll let us get to that soon. But once you've got this and you got an idea of how these instances are supposed to work, you're well on your way to having nice, clean, uniform data for your unified namespace for your connected factory. Good job.
So there you have it, guys. That is models and instances. In the next video, we're going to get into templates and make this a whole lot quicker to really roll out to a large number of assets. But I hope this gets you rolling and you have some ideas of how you want to apply a model and make some instances in order to make your data more consistent and easier, more reliable to work with. I'll see you in the next one.